Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Tegan and Sara called Hey, I'm Just Like You. So I'll admit, this was a swerve I didn't expect from Tegan and Sara. When this duo went outright synth-pop on Heartthrob in 2013 and then followed it up with Love You to Death 3 years later, I assumed that their path had been set, especially given how much crossover success they had found in the meantime. Sure, some of the die-hard rock set were a little alienated by the genre pivot, but it seemed like a lot of them were a lot more forgiving in the end, especially if they remembered how they started off very early in their career with songs that flirted with pop structures and even some pop production. But I won't deny that I was among the people who were both surprised and a little bit encouraged that Tegan and Sara were going to bring back the electric guitars for their newest project, Hey, I'm Just Like You. More to the point, they'd be revisiting and tweaking many songs they had written or cut as demos in their teenage years, but given the benefit of 20 years in the industry, bring a little bit more refinement. And to me, this seemed like a fascinating but pretty smart choice. I've long held the opinion that their pop pivot did wonders for tightening up their writing and easing some of the strained stabs at indie rock obliqueness that left me more frustrated with their work in the 2000s than I'd normally like to admit. Now, granted, I had no idea how all this would translate to 2019. Going back to So Jealous and The Con, those are two albums with structures and tones that are inextricably linked to the 2000s, and a quick re-listen to both albums reminded me precisely how hit and miss they could be, especially on the more twee side of the writing. But you know what? I did see a lot of potential, so what did we get on Hey, I'm Just Like You? Well, I can say this. If you were expecting Tegan and Sara return to the jangling, buzzy, borderline twee side of their 2000s output, Hey, I'm Just Like You is not that. Even as it does seem reflective of certain sounds of the early 2000s, it's just that said sounds are being made by Hilary Duff or Ashley Simpson, or maybe even that Brie Larson album Everybody But Me is forgotten about. You know, the confessional pop rock that at the time Tegan and Sara would have been considered left of the dial of, or to the ears of some fans, above that sort of thing in the grand tradition of manufacturing veneers of authenticity. And yet, as someone who tends to have a pretty big soft spot for that era of pop rock, and you can actually appreciate an update with a bit of a modern sheen, I really wound up enjoying this Tegan and Sara album a lot. Maybe only on the cusp of greatness, but it works about as well as the best songs that came out of that era and scene. In other words, way better than most critics of the time would dare admit, because yeah, this turned out pretty great. And yet here's one of the biggest tricks to making it all work. Tegan and Sara, they are selling all these songs with genuine sincerity, conscious of the smaller scale and scope of the material, but also aware that with cleaner harmonies and selling these tunes with genuine, yearning emotion, it'll make even more lightweight material actually stick the landing. There isn't much in the way of sarcasm or really any irony, and that tempers these pop songs in a bit of a different way, trading unrefined exuberance for the relatively straightforward honesty, clarity, and lack of pretentiousness from comes from getting a little older and a little wiser, and not enough to waste time with a lot of sort of ironic deflection. And while this has come through in Tegan and Sara's pop pivots before, the cadence and the structure of these songs still has hints of some of that adolescent clumsiness and leaning into the inherent emotional contradictions that came with fractured relationships. It's always been in Tegan and Sara's writing, but now it's more to the forefront. Only where 20 years ago would have been rooted in teenage melodrama, as older adults, the framing is a little more considered and knowledgeable of the reality of it all and how it still might be applicable. And when this album's at its best, it's playing into how the context might be slightly different, separated by the decades, but the emotionality remains as resonant, as true. Finding love at a darkened rave when you're bottoming out, that feels pretty much the same regardless of your age on the title track, as does realizing the deep wells of drug-exposed insecurity and don't believe the things they tell you, they lie. The lies that they're telling to you and that you're telling to yourself. Or the wish to provide wisdom and closure when you're providing support to someone questioning their own insecurities on, hello, I'm right here. And what I really love about this album is not only the conflicted emotions that highlight every single breakup and tormented relationship, but how they don't let themselves off the hook either. There's balance in the framing, like the acknowledgement of how people use each other and I don't owe you anything. Or on how I know I'm not the only one, there's a flat admittance of how much the weight of other people's expectations can impact the relationship from outside side. Hell, a song like All I Have to Give the World Is Me, it might even hit harder as you get older, as your public persona becomes all the more entrenched in your mind, and insecurities, they're buried more deeply, but they become even more deeply felt. Now that being said, the flip side is that the meter and rhyme structure do have a little bit of clumsiness. The hook of "we don't have fun when we're together anymore," prime example. And while it can be kind of endearing, the writing sometimes in the naivete doesn't quite have the same resonance, like on the acoustic ballad "Please Help Me." But really, those are minor quibbles. As a whole, even if I would argue this album feels a bit more like a compilation of songs with similar ideas than holding a full thematic arc, there is a refinement and consistency that I found really refreshing. Now, where I can see there being more questions and criticisms comes in the pop rock production. And let me get this out of the way now. I still think the drums are a little louder than they should be, carry over from the last album, and between them and the vocals, the top of the mix can feel a little bit clipped and a little bit compressed, especially with the guitars. Now, if you're familiar with that style of early to mid-2000s pop rock that Tegan and Sara are emulating, it's not precisely a terrible thing, and between the vocal progressions, the near-constant acoustic accompaniment, and the choice of some of the watery synths for that blending, that is an era that they're emulating the most, that early to mid-2000s spot, albeit with occasional guitar leads that are swamped out in reverb that's definitely more modern, or some late 80s drum and drum machine cascades to ramp up the bombast. And yet, you know what? Even with that sound, the hooks are pretty damn great. The flip into more restrained major keys on the hook of the title track might feel a bit cutesy, but the gloss on the second half of the hook keeps it from feeling really twee for me. And when you match it with the blown out darkness of "Don't Believe the Things They Tell You, They Lie," the rich vocal harmonies off the sparkling synth cascades and "I Don't Owe You Anything," that almost seems to remind me of modern Marianas Trench, and that's a compliment. Or the meaty rollick of the guitars on "I Know I'm Not the Only One," or even how "You Go Away" and "I Don't Mind" breaks into a Church's-esque sparkle off the synthesizers and the stiffer burble of the verses. They're really great moments. And while I do wish the guitars could bring a little bit more distortion and sizzle, although the opener "Hold My Breath Until I Die" did have a surprising amount of it, the chipper smoothness married to the solid but earnest harmonies, the mostly organic percussion, the rounded bass grooves, and a mix that does allow the anthemic moments to connect pretty consistently and actually get big, yeah, it really matches why that era works so well for me. My only real complaint is that sometimes a few of the deeper cuts could blur together in their sound, but when you drill into the lyrical nuance, you'll find enough to differentiate song to song. It is a project that rewards repeated listens, especially when you pay attention to how the pronouns will subtly shift within the song to add that nuance. But that is kind of the rub with this. Tegan and Sara might have written this album to call back to their youth with a polish that flew in the face of when they were releasing in the early 2000s, but if they had released this album in 2003 with this sound, I know for a fact the majority of critics would have thrown them aside even more than they already did. Pop rock that balanced out adolescent framing and nuance well rarely got a lot of respect in that era, and really wouldn't until later in the decade, in the 2010s. And that places Hey I'm Just Like You in a place that's almost out of time. Originally composed in the 90s, refined and released in the 2010s, and sonically it would have been at home in the 2000s, but it would never have seen the respect that I think it deserves. And today, I could say it's a pretty damn great pop rock album. And I like it in a similar way that I like Niall Horan's solo debut Flicker from 2017. Incredibly tight pop craftsmanship that owes a lot of its career and owes a lot of its shine to the past, but not feeling indebted to it, and a lot of yearning emotionality and genuine lyrical nuance to boot. And as such, yeah, 8 out of 10, absolutely recommended. This is going to be an album that's flying under the radar for a lot of people, and you know what? It deserves some real attention. And don't call it a throwback. An album like this, it's really come through the years. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm not sure how this review is going to be received. I'm not sure how this album is getting received, to be honest. It seems like it's going under the radar, but if you want to buy and stream it, highly recommend you do. Links in the description below, and I got the poll up there to see how you guys feel on it. Comments are also down there. Tell me what you think. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for episodes of Billboard Breakdown or other reviews, they're in the card right over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.